Before the first human name was spoken upon the earth, before Adam opened his eyes and felt the still wet clay on his skin, there were already beings watching. They were there, positioned among the stars, wrapped in light, assigned to functions that the human mind would never be able to fully comprehend. They were the sons of God. Angels, sentinels, guardians of a cosmic order that had functioned in perfect harmony since the moment the Creator separated light from darkness. They sang when the foundations of the earth were laid. They trembled with joy when the seas received their boundaries. They gazed in reverence when the divine breath transformed dust into life. But something changed, something that no prophecy had foreseen and no angelic tongue dared to name, began to grow silently in the hearts of some of them. And what began as a glance would become the greatest catastrophe the ancient world had ever known. The earth in those days was young, its rivers ran clean, its forests stretched like green mantles over endless valleys. The children of Adam multiplied. Generations were born, grew, built, died. From Seth came a lineage that sought the name of the Lord. From Cain came another marked by rebellion and by the blood of the first murder. And between these two currents, humanity walked. Fragile, beautiful, divided. The daughters of men grew. They were fair. Their faces carried the mark of the divine image, though faded by sin. Their eyes shone under the sun of a land that had not yet known the flood. And it was that brightness that crossed the border between the visible and the invisible. It was that brightness that reached the eyes of those who should never have looked. But what would come next would change everything. The sons of God looked down. The sacred text is direct. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took wives for themselves from all that they chose. There was no courtship, there was no permission, there was no blessing, there was only desire, a desire that broke the most fundamental laws of creation, because those beings were not made of flesh. They had no blood. They did not belong to the material world. They inhabited a dimension where time did not exist and matter was irrelevant. But they chose to descend. They chose to trade glory for earth. They chose to abandon their principality, as the Apostle Jude would record centuries later, and to leave their own habitation. The decision was not impulsive. It was deliberate, calculated, collective. According to the tradition preserved in the book of Enoch, referenced in the letters of Peter and Jude, 200 of them gathered. 200. Not one, not two. 200 celestial beings, led by the one whom the apocryphal scriptures call Semyaza, made a pact, a mutual oath that they would descend together, take wives from among the humans and bear children. They knew they were transgressing. They knew they were crossing a line that should never be crossed, and still they descended. The leader told the others that he feared being the only one to pay for such a grave sin. So they all swore together. A pact sealed atop a mountain. 200 names, 200 invisible signatures, and the death sentence upon an entire world began to be written at that exact moment. And then it happened. They descended, not as lightning, not as wind. They descended in visible form, tangible. They assumed bodies that could be touched, that could feel, that could procreate. Jewish tradition records that they taught the women enchantments, the cutting of roots, and the knowledge of herbs. They taught men to forge swords, knives, shields, and armor. They brought to the earth the knowledge of warfare on a scale that primitive humanity had never known. They taught astrology, signs of the stars, cosmetics, the dyeing of fabrics, knowledge that in itself might seem neutral, but that in that context represented a deliberate contamination of the natural order. Each lesson was a seed of corruption. Each revelation was a step toward the abyss. Humanity was being reprogrammed. And in the wombs of the women who had united with these beings, something began to grow. Silence. 9 months. perhaps less, perhaps more. The biblical text does not specify the duration of the gestation, but it records the result. And the result was terrifying. The women gave birth to children, but they were not ordinary children. They were not babies that fit in human arms. They were the Nephilim. The Hebrew word comes from the root nephal, which means to fall, the fallen ones, the ones who cause others to fall, the ones born from the fall of celestial beings who abandoned their position before God. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 records that in those days there were Nephilim on the earth, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These Nephilim were the mighty men, the men of renown, who were of old. Mighty men, men of renown. Words that in any other context would sound like praise. But there, in that text, they carry the weight of a warning, because their fame was not built on goodness, it was built on terror. But the peace would not last long. What ran through the veins of the Nephilim was a mixture that defied the categories of creation. They carried within themselves the inheritance of the celestial and the earthly. They possessed strength that did not belong to human bodies, a stature that surpassed any known measure. The Book of Enoch describes their height as reaching 300 cubits, a proportion that, even when considered as hyperbolic language, indicated beings of monstrous dimensions. But it was not just their size that defined them, it was their nature. They were hybrids, creatures that existed in a space between two worlds without truly belonging to either. They did not have the purity of angels, they did not have the fragility of men. They had both, and neither completely, and this made them dangerous in a way that no human being could have foreseen. The earth began to change. The Nephilim grew, and as they grew, violence grew with them. According to the records preserved in Jewish tradition and indirectly referenced by the New Testament, the giants began to devour everything that the labor of men produced. The harvests were not enough. The flocks disappeared. Famine settled in, not because of lack of rain, but because of an excess of mouths impossible to feed. And when the food ran out, they turned against the men themselves. They attacked, they devoured, they destroyed. The earth that God had created in perfection, the earth that had received the breath of life, the earth that had been blessed with rivers and fruits and seasons, now groaned under the weight of creatures that should never have been born. What God saw made him stop breathing. This is not a figure of speech. The biblical text uses language that borders on the unbearable. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Continually, without pause, without interval, without a single glimmer of goodness that would justify the preservation of that generation. Every thought, every intention, every desire, all corrupted. The contamination that began with the gaze of the angels now spread like an invisible plague across all flesh. The violence was total, the perversity was absolute, and in the following verse, the sacred writer records something that makes the heart of any reader stop. Then the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. God felt pain, not a human pain, not a limited pain, a pain that only the Creator can feel when he sees the most precious work of his hands disfigured beyond any recognition. He looked upon the earth and no longer saw his image reflected in the eyes of men. He saw shadows. He saw monsters. He saw the result of a mixture that had contaminated the original design of humanity. And it was then that the Lord spoke the words that sealed the fate of an entire age. I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I regret that I have made them. The sentence was total, absolute, irreversible. The earth would be washed, and everything that breathed upon it would be carried away by the waters. And it was at that moment that everything collapsed. But in the midst of the densest darkness the earth had ever known, a light insisted on shining. One man, a single man, Noah. The biblical text says that Noah was righteous and perfect in his generations. The word perfect, in Hebrew tamim, carries a meaning that goes beyond moral behavior. It indicates integrity, completeness, purity. Some scholars believe that this expression suggests that Noah was perfect in his lineage, that is, uncontaminated by the mixture that had corrupted the rest of humanity. His human genetics remained intact, his blood was clean. And that, in a world where the boundaries between human and angelic had been violated, was the rarest and most precious thing that existed. Noah walked with God. In the midst of a generation running in the opposite direction, he walked the other way. He saw the Nephilim crossing the fields like living towers. He heard the screams of their victims. He felt the ground tremble beneath the weight of creatures that made trees look like shrubs. And still he did not bow. He did not mix. He did not become contaminated. Fear existed. Loneliness too. But there was something greater. There was the voice. The same voice that had called forth light on the first morning of the world now called Noah on the last night of an era. And what God asked next would challenge everything Noah knew. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. The order was specific. 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, 30 in height, 3 decks, 1 door, 1 window, pitch inside and out. Noah heard every detail, every measurement, every instruction, and in the silence that followed, an icy truth settled in his chest. God was going to destroy the world, not a city, not a region, the world, everything, everyone. Every being that breathed upon the face of the earth would be erased, and the only thing between humanity and total extinction would be that ark, that impossible boat, that madness of wood and faith built in the middle of a desert by an old man who heard voices no one else could hear. And then the construction began. The days dragged on like wounds that never heal. Noah cut wood. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, carried planks. The smell of pitch permeated their clothes, their hair, their hands. The sun burned their backs as sweat rolled down faces that aged with the rhythm of each hammer strike. And as the ark grew, the world around, it rotted. The violence of the Nephilim did not diminish. The corruption of men did not retreat. On the contrary, each day was worse than the one before. Each morning brought news of more blood spilled, more families destroyed, more earth stained. And in the midst of it all, Noah hammered, nailed, sealed, obeyed. No one believed. Neighbors laughed. Passers-by mocked. Men who had known Noah since childhood called him insane. Where is the flood, they said. Where is this God who promises destruction? The sky is clear. The rivers flow peacefully. Nothing will happen. But Noah did not argue, did not debate, did not try to convince. He just built, because his faith did not depend on the approval of men. It depended on the word of the one who had never failed. And while the world laughed, the ark rose, plank by plank, deck by deck, day after day, year after year. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe now and turn on the bell. Here, every narrative is a journey through the sacred pages, and what comes next in the story of the Nephilim will make the ground vanish from under your feet. The years passed. 120, according to the count God had determined. The time of divine patience was coming to an end, and while Noah grew old building, the Nephilim grew old destroying. The earth was unrecognizable. The sacred text says that all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. All flesh. Not just the Nephilim, not just the fallen angels. All flesh. The contamination was total, like a poison that begins in a single vein and spreads until there is not a single drop of clean blood in the entire body. the corruption that began with 200 angels now infected the entire organism of creation. Animals, men, women, children, everything was sick, everything was dying. And God, who had given 120 years of warning, who had sent Noah as a preacher of righteousness, who had waited with a patience that only the Creator possesses, finally spoke for the last time. "Come, you and all your household, into the ark." The voice did not tremble, did not hesitate, did not ask. It commanded. Noah lifted his eyes to the sky. It was clear. No clouds, no signs, nothing in nature indicated what was coming. But Noah did not need signs. He had the word, and the word was enough. He gathered his wife, called his sons and their wives, 8 people, only 8, in a world of millions. And as the animals began to arrive in pairs, guided by an invisible force that the men around them could not explain, Noah entered the ark. And then God closed the door. It was not Noah, it was not his sons. God himself extended his hand and sealed the entrance. On the inside, darkness, the gentle sway of wood, the breathing of hundreds of creatures packed into compartments that smelled of hay and fear. On the outside, the world went on. The Nephilim walked. Men drank, ate, married, laughed, everything normal, everything as always, until the first thunder split the sky, and then fire fell. No, worse than fire, water. The fountains of the great deep burst open. The Hebrew text uses a word that suggests a subterranean explosion, as if the earth itself cracked from the inside out, vomiting entire oceans that had been stored in cavities no human eye had ever seen. At the same time, the windows of heaven opened. It was not rain. It was the sky pouring its contents upon the earth with a violence that turned drops into hammers. Water came from below, it came from above, it came from every direction. And within hours, the world the Nephilim knew began to disappear. No one was breathing. The first to feel it were those in the valleys. The water rose past their ankles, past their knees, past their waists. Human hands were raised in desperation. Screams echoed between mountains that were beginning to be swallowed. And then the Nephilim realized, those colossal beings who for centuries had dominated the earth with iron fists and eyes that knew no mercy, looked at the rising water and for the first time in their existence felt something they had never experienced. Fear. A primitive, absolute, paralyzing fear. The water did not care about their height. It did not respect their strength. It did not retreat before their weapons. It simply rose and rose and rose. They tried to flee. They ran to the mountains. They climbed rocks with fingers that broke stones. They shoved one another in a desperate competition for the last remaining patch of dry land. But there was not enough land. There was no mountain high enough. There was no place in the world where that water could not reach, because it was not merely water, it was judgment. And the judgment of God knows no refuge for those who refuse to enter through the door he opens. 40 days, 40 nights. The rain did not stop, the fountains did not close, and one by one, the Nephilim fell. The same arms that had uprooted trees now flailed uselessly against currents that had no end. The same voices that had roared commands of war now gurgled pleas that no one could hear. The same eyes that had gleamed with the celestial inheritance of their angelic fathers now dimmed beneath meter after meter of dark, cold water. They sank, one by one, dozens, hundreds, thousands, the mighty, the men of fame, the giants who made the earth tremble, all swallowed by the same silence that now covered the planet like a shroud. And inside the ark, Noah listened. He heard the sound of rain striking the wood. He heard the groan of the wind that pushed waves the size of mountains against the sides of the boat. He heard the silence that settled as the screams from outside died one by one until not a single one remained. And in that silence, Noah knew the ancient world had ended. The Nephilim were no more. The forbidden mixture that had run through their veins had been diluted in billions of liters of salt water and divine judgment. The earth was clean, washed, empty, and floating over that infinite nothingness, an ark of wood and faith carried humanity's last hope. But God had not finished with the story. The waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. Then, slowly, they began to recede. The wind blew, the fountains closed, the mountains reappeared like islands emerging from a nameless ocean, and the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, firm, intact, a survivor. Noah opened the window. He released a raven, then a dove. The dove returned. There was nowhere to land. He waited 7 days. He sent it again. This time it returned with an olive branch in its beak. Life was being reborn. The earth was healing. And when finally the door of the ark opened and Noah's feet touched the damp soil of a new world, the first thing he did was build an altar. The scent of sacrifice rose to heaven, and God smelled the pleasing aroma, and he made a covenant. Never again would he destroy all flesh by means of water. The rainbow would be the sign, a band of colors in the sky as the divine signature of a promise that endures to this day. The earth would begin again. Humanity would have a second chance. But the memory of the Nephilim would not be erased so easily, because they returned. Not in the same form, not with the same intensity, but centuries. After the flood, when the children of Israel marched through the desert toward the promised land, Moses sent 12 spies to explore Canaan. The men went. They saw a land flowing with milk and honey. They saw grapes so large they were carried on poles by 2 men. They saw riches, they saw abundance, but they saw something more. Something that made the blood freeze in the veins of 10 of the 12 spies. We also saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak, who are descendants of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight, grasshoppers. Men trained for war, who had crossed the Red Sea and survived the desert, looked at the inhabitants of Canaan and felt like insects. The shadow of the giants still stretched over the land. The sons of Anak, the Anakim, descendants of a lineage that carried in their bones and blood the echoes of an age that should have been forgotten. They dwelt in Hebron. There were 3, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, names that made entire armies retreat. Fortified cities sheltered them, thick walls protected them, and the fear they inspired was so deep that 10 of the 12 spies convinced the entire nation of Israel not to enter the land God had promised. "We are not able to go up against that people," they said, "for they are stronger than we, stronger than the people God had delivered from Egypt, stronger than the people who had seen the plagues, stronger than the people who had walked between walls of water." Fear was greater than faith, and the result was devastating. 40 years. An entire generation wandered in the desert because they did not believe that the same God who had drowned the original Nephilim could defeat their descendants. But 2 men disagreed, Caleb and Joshua, only 2 out of 12. Caleb stood before the people and said with a voice that cut through fear like a blade, "Let us go up at once and possess the land, for we are well able to overcome it." It was not ignorance. Caleb had seen the same giants. He had felt the same chill down his spine. But where the others saw obstacles, he saw opportunity. Where the others saw the shadow of the Nephilim, he saw the hand of God. And 45 years later, when he finally entered Canaan, Caleb did not ask for the easy plains. He asked for Hebron, the city of the giants, the fortress of the sons of Anak. "Give me this mountain," he said to his old friend Joshua. "If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out, as the Lord said." And he drove them out, every one of them. The days of the giants were numbered. But it was not only in Hebron that they dwelt. To the east, beyond the Jordan, reigned Og, king of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim, a race of giants whose memory was already ancient when Abraham walked the land. The iron bed of Og measured 9 cubits in length and 4 in width, nearly 4 meters by nearly 2 meters. A piece of furniture that looked more like a monument, a physical reminder that there existed beings upon the earth whose scale defied human normalcy. But Og, with all his stature, with all his army, with all 60 fortified cities of his kingdom, fell before Israel. God told Moses not to fear him, and Moses did not fear, and Og, the last of the Rephaim of Bashan, was struck down, and his land was distributed among the tribes. The Emim had inhabited where the Moabites would later live. The Zamzummim occupied the land that would later belong to the Ammonites. Strange names for strange peoples, all described as tall, numerous, considered Rephaim. The land of Canaan, before the arrival of Israel, was dotted with remnants of this lineage that refused to disappear. Like roots of a tree that had been cut down but insisted on sprouting again, the descendants of those ancient beings kept appearing, generation after generation, defying God's plan for humanity. And then came Goliath. Centuries after Og, centuries after the Anakim, in the city of Gath, among the Philistines, a man arose whose shadow darkened the valley of Elah. 6 cubits and a span in height, nearly 3 meters. His armor weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, 57 kilograms of metal covering a body that seemed to have been sculpted for war. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. The iron point weighed 600 shekels. And for 40 days, morning and evening, that mountain of flesh and steel descended into the valley and shouted words that made the soldiers of Israel tremble inside their tents. Choose a man from among you to come down against me. If he is able to fight with me and strike me, we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and strike him, you shall be our servants. 40 days, not a single Israelite accepted. Silence, until a boy appeared, ruddy, with bright eyes, a sling in his hand, and 5 smooth stones from the brook in his pouch. David did not see the giant the way the soldiers saw him. Where they saw an invincible monster, David saw an uncircumcised man who dared to defy the armies of the living God. You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, said the young shepherd with a firmness that made Goliath himself blink in surprise. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. 1 stone, a single stone, launched with divine precision. It struck the giant's forehead, and the ground shook when that colossal body fell face first to the earth. Goliath's own sword separated his head from his shoulders, and the valley of Elah witnessed what the ark had already demonstrated centuries before. There is no giant large enough to stand when God decides to act. But Goliath was not the last. In 2 Samuel chapter 21, the biblical text records that there were more wars against the Philistines, and in each of them, more giants appeared. Ishbi-Benob, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, nearly attacked David and was killed by Abishai. Sippai, another descendant of the giants, fell at Gezer. Lami, the brother of Goliath, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's beam, was defeated by Elhanan. And in Gath, a man of extraordinary stature appeared, who had 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot. A physical anomaly that seemed to scream that something in that lineage was not natural. Something in that blood carried the marks of an origin that went beyond the human. All of them were born to the giants in Gath, the chronicler records, and all of them fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his men. It was the end of an era. The original Nephilim sank in the flood. Their post-flood descendants were eliminated one by one across centuries of biblical history. The Anakim of Hebron, the Rephaim of Bashan, the giants of Gath. Each of them represented an echo of that original sin that occurred when celestial beings crossed a boundary that God had established. Each of them carried in their veins the vestiges of a mixture that should never have existed, and each of them was removed by the hand of the same God who had promised to preserve humanity. The Apostle Peter wrote centuries later that God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. The word Peter used for hell was not the common Greek term Hades. It was Tartaru, Tartarus, a term that appears only once in the entire New Testament, a specific place, a prison reserved exclusively for those angels who committed the sin described in Genesis 6. They are not free. They do not roam the earth. They are chained in darkness, awaiting the judgment of the great day. And Jude confirms, the angels who did not keep their original estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Everlasting chains, not temporary, not negotiable, everlasting. The sin of crossing that boundary was so grave that the punishment has no expiration date. And Peter added yet another detail that connects everything. In his first letter, chapter 3, he wrote that Christ, after his death and resurrection, went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient when the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared. Jesus descended to Tartarus. He looked into the eyes of the very beings who had abandoned heaven because of a forbidden desire, and he proclaimed his victory, not to save them, to declare that the plan they had tried to destroy had prevailed. Humanity survived. The Messiah came. Redemption was accomplished. And they, chained in darkness, heard the news of their ultimate defeat from the mouth of the very Son of God. Have you ever stopped to think about what was truly at stake? Because the story of the Nephilim is not merely about giants. It is about a deliberate attempt to corrupt the human lineage. If all flesh had been contaminated, if there had not remained a single family with purely human blood, then the promise of Genesis 3:15 would have been destroyed. The seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head could not have been born. The Messiah would have had no human body to inhabit. Redemption would have been impossible, and Satan would have won without having to fire a single arrow. The strategy was brilliant in its perversity. Contaminate human DNA, mix the celestial with the earthly, so completely that no pure vessel remained for God's plan. And it almost worked. Almost. Because Noah remained a righteous man, perfect in his generations, the last barrier between humanity and the extinction of the divine plan. And the same God who preserved Noah preserved the promise. Through Shem, through Abraham, through Isaac and Jacob, through Judah, through David, the same one who beheaded Goliath, through Mary, until on a night in Bethlehem, the promised seed was finally born, a baby, fully human, without contamination, without mixture, pure blood flowing through human veins. The plan of the fallen angels had failed. The flood washed the earth. The wars of Israel eliminated the remnants, and the Messiah was born exactly as God had promised. This is the story that runs beneath the surface of Genesis 6. It is not merely an account of giants and angels. It is the story of an invisible war for the soul of humanity. A war that began with a glance and nearly ended with the extinction of the human race. A war whose consequences echoed across millennia, from the valleys of the antediluvian world to the plains of Gath, from the top of Mount Ararat to the manger of Bethlehem. And at the center of it all, a God who refused to give up. God did not send the flood because he hated the world. He sent it because he loved what the world was supposed to be. And in the midst of chaos, he preserved a family, a fresh start, an ark. Perhaps you are living in the midst of a generation that seems lost. Perhaps you feel that the contamination is too great, that the voices are too loud, that the giants we face today, even if they are not 3 meters tall, are too great to defeat. But if God found Noah in the midst of a corrupt world, he can find you in the midst of yours. If a stone in the hand of a ruddy boy brought down the greatest warrior of a generation, imagine what faith in the hand of someone who truly believes can do. The ark is already open. The door has not yet been closed. The choice is yours. Enter before the waters rise. Because the same God who washed the entire world to protect the future of humanity is the same God who today looks at you and says what he said to Noah. I have found grace in you. Enter and live. If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, I choose to enter the ark.